The following program is in no way intended to replace your doctor's advice or treatment program, nor should it be used as a tool for the purpose of self-diagnosis.
Well, welcome to Your Health, Your Choice. We are on tonight, Wednesday night, Thursdays at 1 p.m. and Sundays at 7 p.m. Over the last few weeks, we have been doing pre-recorded programs. And again, tonight, it's a pre-recorded program. So unfortunately, you will not be able to make any calls into the program. Hopefully, maybe March, April, we'll start back doing some live programs on a Wednesday night. But of course, you're more than welcome to ring in on our telephone numbers, 482-4269, 482-4269, if you have any questions arising from this program, or you can email me on claude_khan@yahoo.co.uk. I will repeat those numbers and email addresses as we go on. Since the start of the year, we have done 2 programs which have been repeated. One was on addiction, and several people fed back to me about that program, that it was a lot of good, useful information. And then we covered sexually transmitted diseases, especially as we led up to Carnival. So here we are a week or so after the Carnival time, and I hope that whatever you did, you were cautious, you were moderate, and you are not regretting any of the excesses that normally associated with Carnival time. So we're into what is called a Lent period, where people become more reflective on their spiritual lives. And maybe at the end of the program, when I put on my pastoral hat, I will challenge you with a spiritual thought. Today, what we want to do is I'm going to sort of get back into my one of my comfort zones, as I call it. As you know, I'm a community diabetologist. Diabetes is my specialty, but with diabetes comes hypertension, cholesterol, heart disease, etc. And one of the things that have become more and more of a concern is what we call the metabolic syndrome. Now, we have covered the metabolic syndrome over the last year or two, but I think it's something that's worth revisiting, because as you will see tonight, the metabolic syndrome is often a precursor to several other serious medical problems. And very often, people are walking around with the metabolic syndrome without understanding it. Now, I want you to notice when I use the term metabolic syndrome, it's not just one entity, but it's a constellation of several factors that can lead to various other medical problems, as we will talk about in a few minutes. Now, I have a PowerPoint with some slides, and I'm just going to show you slide 2 at this point. And slide 2 is an interesting slide because, of course, I don't believe in evolution, but as you can see, what this slide is showing, and this is from the International Diabetes Federation, the shape of things to come. And as you can see, over maybe thousands of years, the shape of our bodies have changed. Well, I don't think that we have, in fact, I'm sure that we have not evolved from monkeys, but as you can see, the second and the picture on the left, the extreme right, represents a lot of people that we see today with a lot of abdominal fat, whereas maybe a few years ago, that picture would have been much leaner. And the definition of, it gives you a little definition of metabolic syndrome. It's abdominal obesity plus blood pressure, HDL, triglycerides, etc. Now, I will come back to that in a few minutes to really flesh out what that is. But the diagram is quite important, because what it is showing you is that we have moved from a sort of hunting, gathering type of existence. So, I clearly declare, although I'm coming from a scientific background, that I believe in the creation story. And in fact, I want to say very confidently that we can speak about creation on a scientific background. I remember many, many, many years ago now, while I was at the University of the West Indies doing my first degree, and I was back in the 80s, we had a group of scientists coming down from the US who were called creationists. And it was the first time I've heard that term, creationists. These were people who were looking at creation from a purely scientific point of view. And they had quite a interesting debate against the zoology department, at which point I was part of that department doing zoology. And I was just astounded that as a Christian, I could be quite assured and quite confident that I'm not just saying that I believe the Bible, but there's science to support the creation story. So I'm just saying that that photo we showed, although we are showing an evolving pattern of the shape of the male, what we were really trying to show is the last figure where because of our change of lifestyle, we have changed from hunting, gathering kind of lifestyle to a more sedentary type of lifestyle. So now, rather than go out and hunt for our food, we go to the supermarkets, we go to the fast food outlets, and cooking is becoming something that is outdated. So, our young people need to remember that fast foods are not the answer to everything. Apart from being very calorie dense, it can often make you put on weight at an early age. And before you know it, you take the shape of that man that we showed with excessive weight. And notice where the weight was. The weight was around the tummy area. So, yes. So thank you very much, Josh. So that last man on the right, and I don't know if it's a bottle, a cup of Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Pepsi. Sorry to name some of the outlets. But you could see the distinct change in shape, that the weight has now become centralized, and that's called centralized obesity or adiposity, and that drives a lot of what we call the metabolic syndrome. So we can come off that slide. What I'm going to do now is show you one of our first clips on, it's just about 2 or 3 minutes long, and it gives you a nice overall view of what the metabolic syndrome is all about. So we'll go to that clip at this stage. Okay, so that showed you a very nice overview of the metabolic syndrome, and I have one more clip that I will show later on. What we are trying to show you today is that this whole syndrome is something that can creep up on you very, very gradually. And long before you develop diabetes, full-blown diabetes or hypertension, you can develop features of the metabolic syndrome. And because of that, you then predispose yourself to a lot of the consequences. I'm going to go to slide 4 now, because the slide 4 shows some alternative names for the metabolic syndrome. So over the years, we have heard the term syndrome X, insulin resistance syndrome, the deadly quartet, and the Raven's syndrome. And all these are referring, in fact, to the metabolic syndrome. So we can just come off that slide for a minute. So when you hear these terms, you may hear us talking about the insulin resistance syndrome. You may hear us talking about Raven's syndrome. Gerald Raven was a famous diabetologist who came up with that concept. And then the deadly quartet was referring to the pancreas not working properly, the liver producing too much sugar, a fatty liver, the insulin resistance, the body not being able to react to insulin levels, etc. But of course, we have now moved on from the deadly quartet to something called the ominous octet. Now, when we talk about the ominous octet, we are not talking about a metabolic syndrome. So I don't want to get it too complicated, but basically those terms all refer to the metabolic syndrome. So what I want to do now is give you a little definition of what the major features of the metabolic syndrome is. And if we can bring up slide 6, we will have a look at that. Actually, can we bring up slide 5? Sorry. Slide 5. Right. So the major features of the metabolic syndrome: central obesity, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Hypertriglyceridemia, which is, of course, high triglycerides. Low HDL, and remember HDL is the bad cholesterol. Hyperglycemia and hypertension. So there are 5 main features of the metabolic syndrome. So we can just come off that slide for a minute. So what we are saying is that none of these, for example, when we talk about high blood sugar, in the early stages, the sugar levels may not reach the level to diagnose diabetes. But together with central obesity, and when we talk about central obesity, we're talking about obesity around the tummy area. And, all of us know that as we get older and our metabolic rate drops, it's very interesting that we now have a fitness class at our church, because one of the things about adiposis is that we believe in a holistic ministry, and the medical arm, which is the Adiposis Medical Center, overlaps quite closely with the Adiposis Chapel. So we have been trying to encourage our congregation to be active, to save your money rather than have to visit doctors. And I'm a doctor myself, so I don't mind people coming and visiting me. But if you start exercising and living a healthy lifestyle, you can save yourself from a lot of medical problems. And it's interesting when we get together. In fact, just last night on Monday nights, we meet at 7:30. And in fact, if you're interested in joining our fitness club, you can, again, ring us on 482-4269 or email me, or even WhatsApp me on 330-9161. But it's interesting, in that group, we have very young people, 18, 19, 20 years old, and then someone like myself who, I wouldn't tell you my exact age, but I'm in my 50s. And last night I was observing again our young people, and my daughter, who is 18, she was able to do 600 of those skipping ropes. 600. I struggled to do 50. and then I had to do another 20, and I ended up doing about 120. But, I comforted myself by reminding myself that 2 weeks ago I could only do 5. And by 3 weeks later, I was able to do about 120. The point I'm making, though, is that why do we find it more difficult to exercise and to keep fit as we get older? Well, one of the reasons is that our metabolic rate falls. We begin to put on weight, and then it's more difficult to exercise, more difficult to keep fit. So we put on weight around the tummy area. And I will come back to the exact measurements that we look for when we talk about putting on weight. Now, the second thing was hypertriglyceridemia. So, of course, when we do a lipid profile, and I always remind patients that it's not good enough to know what your total cholesterol is. While your total cholesterol is important, you need to know what your lipid profile is, because a lot of people have an almost normal cholesterol, but their triglycerides are high, especially if you have a lot of body fat, and your HDL. So the other thing that we looked at was your HDL, your high density lipoprotein might be low. So you may have a lipid profile where your cholesterol is good, triglycerides are high, HDL is low, LDL is relatively normal, but you are still at risk of the metabolic syndrome. So hypertriglyceridemia is one of the things that we look at. The other thing, as I said, was the high density lipoprotein. And then we have hyperglycemia and hypertension. Now, I will come back to that, the hypertension and hyperglycemia. When we come back, we have come to our first break. So we're talking about the metabolic syndrome today and all the results and the medical problems that can arise from the metabolic syndrome. We're going to go to our first break, and then when you rejoin us, we will continue the discussion on the metabolic syndrome. Thank you.
We are taking it to higher heights in 2018. Yes, that's right. Cloud9 is going live at 5. The show that makes you smile will have you smiling even more as we're coming to you from 5 p.m. Mondays to Fridays right here on ACTN The Voice. Get ready for liftoff.
Be original, be unique. With digital advertising through the Creation Group of companies. Over 30 locations with over 178K viewers per day to meet your target audience. Be seen with digital advertising from the Creation Group, located at 2A R. Peter Avenue, Woodbrook.
You're watching ACTN, The Voice. Connect with ACTN The Voice on Facebook or Instagram at ACTN The Voice. You're watching ACTN The Voice.
But it's okay, because I got my own grace. I got my own grace. I don't need yours. I got my own. And I will not waste the grace of this day. This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. I refuse to leave any grace misappropriated.
Welcome back to Your Health, Your Choice. We are doing a pre-recorded program tonight. I apologize again for that, but my Wednesday nights are quite booked with my pastoral responsibilities now at my church. So I'm trying to work around that. So we're doing the pre-recorded programs. But of course, if you want to ask questions, you can ring us on 482-4269 during the week, 482-4269. You can email me on claude_khan@yahoo.co.uk, and I'll even give you my WhatsApp number, 330-9161. You can WhatsApp me with your medical questions, and we will be happy, and I'll try my best to respond. So we've been talking about the metabolic syndrome. So we started off the year with addictions, and then we went to sexually transmitted diseases, and now we have come back to sort of the bread and butter of what we have done over the years, the metabolic syndrome. And we are saying that the metabolic syndrome is a constellation of problems, of biochemical problems that can build up over a period of time. And we showed you that there were five aspects of the metabolic syndrome. Abdominal adiposity. What do I mean by that? Fat around the tummy. And as we get older, we know that it's more difficult to keep the fat from being laid down in that area. Secondly, we talked about hypertriglyceridemia, a high triglyceride. Thirdly, a low HDL. The HDL, the high density lipoprotein, when you do your lipid profile, is the good cholesterol, and that should be over 60 or so. Very often we see people with HDLs of 20s and 30s. And then you have hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, and hypertension. But let me just say that the definition within the metabolic syndrome for hyperglycemia is not what we use for diabetes. If you have a fasting blood sugar of above 100, and it might be less than 126, which is the cutoff point for diabetes, that can fit into the metabolic syndrome. And if your blood pressure is persistently over 130, over 85, again, that fits into the definition of the metabolic syndrome. It may not be hypertension, but it fits into what we call pre-hypertension. I'm going to bring up slide 6 now, which talks about the epidemiology. What is the kind of spread of metabolic syndrome? But of course, we know that metabolic syndrome increases with age as you get older. The second point is very important. Increased or greater industrialization and urbanization. And of course, you understand what we mean by that. It's moving from a rural kind of living to a more city-dwelling existence. And then you have increased waist circumference, and then found predominantly in women, and a fasting triglyceride of above 150, and hypertension more likely in men. So these are some of the risk factors. We can come off that slide now. Associated, what is risk factors or the epidemiology. So what we are saying, what it's showing is that the waist circumference problem is often more prominent in women. And as women get into their 30s, they may have babies, they begin put on fat around the tummy area, and as they get into the menopausal time, estrogen levels fall, and that facilitates laying down of fat around the tummy area, whereas hypertension might be more common in the males. So that's the kind of prevalence that we are talking about. Now, I have a second slide, a second clip that goes into a little bit more, not just about the basics of metabolic syndrome, but it also talks a little bit about the treatment of metabolic syndrome. So we can go into that second clip at this point.
About 6 months ago, Graham West says he got fed up with his lifestyle.
The fact that my clothes didn't fit, I was tired, I wasn't exercising, I know I was eating things that I shouldn't have, and I was really looking for a program that seemed to make sense.
West came to the Weight Center at Mass General Hospital in Boston to lose weight, and in the process, he was diagnosed with a potentially life-threatening condition called metabolic syndrome.
Metabolic syndrome is just the tip of the iceberg, as those who have it are 5 times more likely to develop diabetes and 2 times more likely to develop a stroke or have a heart attack.
Metabolic syndrome is a group of risk factors that include increased waist circumference or belly fat, high triglycerides, elevated blood pressure, high blood sugar, and a low HDL or good cholesterol. If a patient has 3 of these 5 risk factors, a diagnosis of metabolic syndrome is made.
Metabolic syndrome is serious and often hides beneath the surface. By that I mean patients don't know they have it, and medical providers don't often screen for it. And let me have you stand up and we'll check your waist circumference.
Dr. Butch says a larger waistline or central obesity is the most common risk factor for metabolic syndrome, and it's often the missing piece of information needed to diagnose the condition.
Listen, we measure blood pressure very well, we check cholesterol levels, but we often don't measure one's waist.
And he says it should be measured because metabolic syndrome is on the rise in the U.S. due to the rise in obesity. About 35% of Americans, almost half of those older than 60, have the condition, and the rate is especially high in women and Hispanics. But once diagnosed, the risk for metabolic syndrome can be greatly reduced or even reversed by losing just 5 to 10% of body weight.
We focus on lifestyle changes, whether it's diet, exercise, sometimes sleep changes, or even reducing stress.
It's working for Graham West. 6 months into the program, he's lost almost 20 pounds. But more importantly, he's lowered his blood pressure, improved his cholesterol, trimmed 4 inches off his waist, and no longer has the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome.
I'm going to be 70 years old, and I think it's now or never, so I'm going to really work at this.
In Boston, I'm Linda Champa for CNN.
Clip showing more about the ways we can treat the metabolic syndrome. And notice we didn't talk much about drug therapy. It was more about lifestyle changes, which I'll come back to. Now, one of the problems with diagnosing the metabolic syndrome, like people with pre-diabetes, pre-hypertension, is that people feel completely well. So again, the name of this program is Your Health, Your Choice. And I always say to patients, that we look after our car engines, our cars, more than we look after ourselves. We don't wait until our cars start giving problems, well, unless you're like me, but normally, if you're sensible enough, every 4 months or 5 months, you will check the water, oil, make sure the plugs are changed, the brake pads, etc. Yet, a lot of us, especially men, we often do not visit our doctors unless we feel ill. And that's an ongoing problem. That's something that, why we do this program, Your Health, Your Choice, because when you get into your 30s and 40s, it's a sensible thing every few years to have a basic blood profile, to probably get your blood pressure checked, your blood sugar checked. When you get to your 50s, for example, you should begin to think about doing a stress test, colonoscopies, etc. So some people may say, well, that's the medical profession trying to get more money out of us. Well, no, actually, it's trying to save your life. Yes, that is what it is. Because people often come in when they have developed advanced medical problems, and then they ask the question: is there a cure for this problem? Many of my patients with diabetes often come in and say, is there a cure for diabetes? When in fact, they have already been diagnosed with diabetes. And bear in mind, many people who have been diagnosed with diabetes may have already had diabetes for 5 or 10 years, and trying to turn the clock back at that stage is very, very difficult. But the clip that we showed was quite interesting, because what it showed is that if you can pick up someone with the metabolic syndrome and you get them to lose weight, about 10% of their body weight. So let's just take someone who's 200 pounds. If you get that person to lose 10 to 15% of their body weight, which is about, say, 20 to 25 pounds, and I'm not saying lose that weight over a crash period, because the problem we have very often is that people go to these weight loss clinics where really good science is not being practiced, and they're placed on these draconian diets where they're told that you should have no rice, no roti, no carbs, just protein and vegetables all day. And of course, if you adopt that diet, you will lose weight, but you also lose muscle mass, you lose energy. I have had patients coming back to me who are quite depressed after following such diets, and very few people, I want to say this very clearly, very few people are able to maintain that kind of lifestyle. So what I say to my patients is, if you can lose 1 pound a week for 6 months, you lose 24 pounds. And you can do it in a way that becomes very natural in your lifestyle. So it's not something artificial. It is something that you are building into your lifestyle, and it becomes a natural part. Now, however, having said all of that, what should drive us to our doctors to be screened for the metabolic syndrome? I'm going to bring up slide 9. And slide 9 shows us some skin conditions that can alert you. So on the left-hand side, you see under the arm a very darkened area. Now, some people may think that's quite normal, but look at on the right-hand side of your slide, behind the neck, it's compared to just below that, you see the skin is quite lighter, and then behind the neck, very dark velvety area. That's something called acanthosis nigricans. Acanthosis nigricans. And then, of course, we have the skin tags, which can also be a feature of the metabolic syndrome. So I'll just come off that for a minute and just point out that there are some skin conditions that can clue you in to the fact that you may be at risk of the metabolic syndrome. So it's the dark, velvety skin around the neck. It's the very dark skin under the axillary region, skin tags, numerous skin tags. And of course, if you're putting on weight, and especially putting on weight around the tummy area. Now, of course, we live in a culture where we kind of celebrate people who are overweight, maybe not adults, but we celebrate children who are slightly overweight. We don't like to see our children very slim. And I have often said on this program that we have made a very deliberate effort to emphasize to our kids, well, they're no longer children, 30 and 18 years old, that they should keep active, keep slim, keep the weight off. And that is what we should be encouraging our children. Now, I know when I say this, some people may resent this, and because they're saying, well, you're labeling our children as overweight. I don't like to use the word fat, but I want you to understand we are not doing our children a favor by overfeeding them, by giving them lots of fast foods, by packing their lunch kits. I understand hopefully some schools now are going through the lunch kits. As I know this happens in the UK, that kids, their lunches are looked at, and if they come to school with soft drinks or lots of snacks, it's sent back home. Now, you might say it's a kind of, that's a kind of nanny state. Why should the government get involved with what we are feeding our kids? But remember, when our kids become teenagers and adults, and they develop things like diabetes and hypertension and heart disease. Who has to pay for it? It's the government. So I think the government has a responsibility to put measures in place so that we can start eating healthily from a young age. Now, there's some other associated conditions, and this is where the metabolic syndrome becomes very interesting, because there's some associated conditions which then brings out the full-blown concern that we have. Because if the metabolic syndrome was just about abdominal fat, if it was just about a high triglyceride or HDL, etc., then maybe we wouldn't be too concerned. So I want to bring up this slide, which is slide 10. And what slide 10 shows us is some of the associated conditions associated with the metabolic syndrome. And of course, the main one is cardiovascular disease. Very, very important. Cardiovascular disease. So people with the metabolic syndrome have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, but not just cardiovascular disease, ischemic strokes and peripheral vascular disease, that is a blood supply to the legs. You also have an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, of course, and that risk is increased by 3 to 5-fold. You have something called NASH or NAFLD, which is hepatic steatosis or a fatty liver, hyperuricemia, which is high uric acid, polycystic ovaries, people with metabolic syndrome, women with metabolic syndrome often have 40 to 50% of them have polycystic ovaries. And then you have something called obstructive sleep apnea, hypertension, insulin resistance. So if we can come off that slide, you can see that the metabolic syndrome is not just an innocent bystander. So it predisposes you to cardiovascular risk. That's why, we sometimes hear the stories of people in their 30s having their first heart attack. They may not even have diabetes or hypertension, full-blown hypertension, but they've been nurturing or incubating the metabolic syndrome for years. And, the question will arise, and maybe we'll discuss this in our last segment, is the metabolic syndrome an illness? Should it be labeled as a medical problem? Should we medicalize it? Or is it just a lifestyle problem? Well, if the metabolic syndrome predisposes you, like smoking, predisposes you to lung cancer, then certainly we should make great attempts to try and eradicate smoking, and as well, not just active smoking, but passive smoking as well. So the metabolic syndrome, the reason why we are concerned with it, increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and I'll come back to the others in a few minutes. We're going to go to our second break, and then we'll have maybe about 18 minutes left on the program, and I'll try and summarize the main points of the metabolic syndrome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know you can't ring in with your live calls, but you can ring us on the numbers that I'll give you again when we return. We're going to go to our second break, and then we'll return for our last segment on this program, Your Health, Your Choice.
We supply all sizes in digital outdoor and indoor signage, both sales and rentals. Be seen with huge, clean, and crisp screens from the Creation Group. Think ahead, stay ahead with the Creation Group of companies. Located at 2A Arupita Avenue, Woodbrook.
We are taking you to higher heights in 2018. Yes, that's right. Cloud9 is going live at 5. The show that makes you smile will have you smiling even more as we're coming to you from 5 p.m. Mondays to Fridays right here on ACTN The Voice. Get ready for a liftoff.
You're watching ACTN, The Voice. Connect with ACTN The Voice on Facebook or Instagram at ACTN The Voice. You're watching ACTN The Voice.
When you do not start your process with God at the center, it will always end in disappointment. There is no significance to any process that God is not the center of. I don't believe anything more than I believe that. To neglect your priorities is to forfeit your provision. There's never a lack of provision in God. Never. Everything that you need is already here. There is never a lack of provision. So the problem of the people in the way they experienced it was a problem with provision. Haggai said, it's not provision. Consider your ways. What you think is a lack of provision is a lack of priority.
We're on our last segment tonight, and again I remind you that it's pre-recorded, and you are more than welcome to call us on 482-4269 during the week, or you can email me on claude_khan@yahoo.co.uk, or you can even WhatsApp me on 3309161 if you have questions about what we have talked tonight, or what we are talking about tonight. So we are talking about the metabolic syndrome, and we have about maybe about 18 minutes left. So I want to kind of give you the definition when I say the exact figures we look at. So before I do that, let me just bring up slide 11, which is it's a nice slide because it shows that at the center of all this that we are talking about, type 2 diabetes, if we go in a clockwise direction, hypertension, impaired glucose tolerance, obesity, polycystic ovary disease, hyperuricemia, acanthosis nigricans, decreased fibrinolytic activity, dyslipidemia, atherosclerosis. Insulin resistance is at the center of that problem. So I just want to come off that slide for a second because what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is basically your body not being able to respond to the insulin that you're producing. So what happens is that your pancreas the beta cells begin to overwork themselves, begin to produce more insulin, and the more insulin your body is producing, it tends to lead to the laying down of body fat, and then that can lead to all the other problems we have seen. So insulin resistance is at the core of this problem. So if we can diagnose someone with metabolic syndrome and attack the problem of insulin resistance, which is mainly weight loss, healthy eating, and there are tablets like metformin, there used to be a tablet called Avandia that we could put people on that can actually be used in the early stages to try and help sensitize the body. Because you see, if we're talking about insulin resistance, and we say that we can sensitize the body to the insulin you are producing, it then begins to rest the pancreas and it begins to deal with a lot of the metabolic problems we're talking about. So what is that? It's called the International Diabetes Federation. Their criteria for diagnosing the metabolic syndrome. I'm just going to bring up slide 12 here. Slide 12. So the waist circumference should be greater than 90 centimeters. That's centimeters in males, so greater than 80. Now, if you convert that to inches, it's going to be about 34 inches in males, 34 to 36, and 32 in females. So that's the basic criteria, plus two of the following. Hypertriglyceridemia, so if your triglycerides are greater than 150, or if your HDL is less than 14 a male, or less than 15 a female, or if your blood pressure is greater than 130 over 85, or your fasting blood sugar is greater than 100. So it's a waist circumference together with any of the two of the others. So you need three. Number one plus either A, B, C, or D, two of those to diagnose the metabolic syndrome. So we could just come off that slide now. One of the things, now I know some people might be shouting at me tonight and thinking, 34 inches for a man, well, that's very difficult to achieve as you get older, and 32 inches for a female. Now, note, I don't have time to go into this. It's one of the things that we teach medical students to do is how do you measure waist circumference? Well, you stand up straight, you take a deep breath in and out, and the waist circumference is not where you wear your trousers. So that's very important. Your waist circumference is basically just around the tummy button area. So that might give us even more reason for concern, because a lot of us as men, we wear our trousers slightly lower down and we think we are wearing a size 34 or 36 when really our waist circumference is 40. But the other thing to just bear in mind is that different ethnic groups have different cutoff points. So it's the same with BMI, body mass index. If you are of an East Indian background, your ideal body weight, body mass index should be less than 23. But if you are if you are Caucasian, then your body mass index or Caucasian or Afro-Trinidadian, Afro-Caribbean, then that body mass index is 25. The same thing with waist circumference. While we are happy with a waist circumference of 90 in men generally, for East Indian men it's slightly lower. So we need to look at the ethnic mix that we are talking about. So the diagnosis of the metabolic syndrome. So notice when I gave you, and in fact, if I can just bring up slide, I think this is slide 14. Slide 14. You can see that for different groups, so for European people, the waist circumference for a man is about 94 centimeters. But for South Asians, and we fall into the East Indian community here in Trinidad, falls into that, the waist circumference falls to about 90 centimeters. And then you have the Chinese, the Japanese, the ethnic South and Central Americans, Sub-Saharan Africans, etc. So this is where we can just come off that slide. This is where it makes it very, very interesting. And notice when I gave you the figures for the blood pressure and the blood sugar, normally blood pressure is diagnosed with a value of about 140 over 80 or 140 over 85. We are saying for the metabolic syndrome, we are looking at a figure of 130 over 85 and a fasting blood sugar of above 100, not 126. So it's slightly different to what we usually talk about. And I know we only have about 10 more minutes, so I just wanted to come down to some of the treatments, because if I don't finish this program with the treatments, then I wouldn't be really doing justice. So I'm going to bring up slide 24. Slide 24, which talks about lifestyle modifications, slide 24. So having talked about the metabolic syndrome, we talk about lifestyle modifications and weight reduction, including a combination of calorie restriction, increased physical activity, and behavior modification. So that slide is quite fitting, and it shows that sometimes people are overweight and they don't even realize it. So if we can just come off that slide, the problem is the way that we have grown up. It's very often difficult to change. So if you have grown up eating roti for breakfast, rice for lunch, roti for dinner, and I come along and tell you to start eating cereals and start, if you have never exercised in your life, you have never seen your parents exercise, and I start telling you to start exercising, eating more vegetables and salad, etc. Some people are not going to like that. I'm going to show another slide, 25. So, if we cut back on our calorie intake, a calorie restriction of just about 500 kilocalories, that equates to a weight reduction of about 1 pound per week, just cutting back on your calories. Now, bear in mind that a normal adult may have a calorie intake of about 1,500 to 2,000 kilocalories. So if you're cutting back on 500, it may be simply cutting out a soft drink or cutting out one of those burgers, etc. I understand that even a simple burger, Big Mac, is about 500 kilocalories. Diets restricted in carbohydrates typically provide a rapid initial weight loss. Adherence to the diet is more important than which diet is chosen. And the last sentence there, a high-quality diet enriched in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean poultry, and fish should be encouraged to provide the maximum oral benefits. So what we are saying is that you don't have to go on a draconian diet. You don't have to try and do away with rice or roti completely. But if you have a balanced diet, a high quality diet, where you have you eat fruits, and I'm didn't grow up eating a lot of fruit. My wife did, and she's trying to encourage us to increase our fruit intake. So each week we have someone delivering some fruit for us, and many mornings I find myself now having some grapes and a banana, and of course, well, I like my cup of coffee, but that's my breakfast. So rather than the roti and the rice, etc. And I personally feel that I'm losing a little bit of weight as a result of changing my eating pattern. So eating healthily means that your diet changes and you begin to exercise. I'm going to bring up slide 26 quickly. Slide 26. What to do, it says, well, kick out a lot of those fast foods. Kick out the chocolate biscuits and all the nice foods that you see there. We need to do that. And then I'm just going to bring up the next slide, which is 27, because this is very important as we come to an end tonight. So 60 to 90 minutes of daily activity. Now, at least 30 minutes, but 60 to 90 minutes. Gradually increases in physical activity should be encouraged to enhance adherence and avoid injury. Some high-risk patients should undergo formal cardiovascular evaluation before initiating an exercise program, and physical activity should be formal exercise such as jogging, swimming, tennis, routine activities such as gardening, walking, or house cleaning. So I'm just going to say at this point that, if you have not exercised in a long time, then you may not want to jump straight into 60 minutes of exercise. And as I said, at our fitness classes at our church, we our fitness trainer goes easy on me. So he allows me to do maybe just 100 of the skipping exercises, whereas my daughter and some of the younger people will do 600. So you have to know your limit, but you increase gradually. That's the important thing. You start slowly and you increase gradually. And I'm going to bring up one last slide because we only have about 3 more minutes. Slide 28. There are some drugs, appetite suppressants like sibutramine. Then you have Orlistat, which is a absorption inhibitor. And then, of course, you have bariatric surgery, which is really for people who are very, very overweight. So what I've tried to do tonight is to give you an overview of the metabolic syndrome and the fact that it's a precursor to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. And if we can catch people with the metabolic syndrome, we can prevent the onset of diabetes, we can prevent the onset of cardiovascular disease, etc. And we can prevent a lot of heartache, literally, in the years ahead. And we've talked about the treatments, which is basically changing your lifestyle, healthy eating, but there is a place for drug therapy, there is a place for bariatric surgery, etc. And putting all of that together is extremely important. I think I just have about 1 more minute left. I want to remind you, you can call us on 482-4269, 482-4269 during the week. You can email me on claude_khan@yahoo.co.uk, or you can WhatsApp me on 330-9161. As I end tonight, we have been doing a program at our church, a 6-week program, the Anaposis Chapel. We are located at in Koke on the bypass. We have been doing a series called What on Earth Am I Created For? And one of the things I shared with our church on Sunday is that I was created to become more like Jesus. You know, very often in our church, I say that I'm not too enthusiastic about calling myself a Christian. I prefer to call myself a Jesus follower. And I want to say to all of you listening to us tonight that you have a particular race to run. And this is what I ended with, and I'll end with tonight. I ended with this on Sunday at my church. Don't try to run the race of your parents or of your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife. God has a race for you to run. You must know that race. Run that race. It simplifies your life and it gives you passion for living. And as you look at your life, begin to ask yourself the question, what would Jesus do? When you find yourself in a conflict situation, what would Jesus do? We're a Christian station. I don't apologize. I have a faith in Jesus Christ. I believe he died on the cross for my sins. And that's why the philosophy of my life and my practice is based on Jesus Christ. I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight on Your Health, Your Choice. We have talked about the metabolic syndrome. You can look at this program again on Thursdays at 1 p.m. and Sunday nights at 7 p.m. And I've given you all the telephone numbers. You can ring or email us for further information. Once again, thank you very much for joining us on Your Health, Your Choice.